Throughout the Gospels, there are times where crowds are pressing in on Jesus because they've heard of his miraculous abilities to heal, or in this case, because they want to hear what he has to say. And either the people or Jesus has to resort to some creative measures in order to make sure everyone can see and hear it. And in this particular passage, Jesus is at what Luke refers to as a lake, and other gospel writers refer to as the Sea of Galilee. And in order for everybody to see him, Jesus gets into a boat and sets out in the water so that the people on the shore can hear what he has to say. We're told in the passage that he was in Peter's boat, Simon being another name for Peter, Simon Peter. Have you ever wondered why it was that he chose Peter's boat specifically? Well, Luke suggests to us that it was because he already had a relationship with him. Earlier in Luke's gospel, we read about how Peter's mother-in-law was seriously ill, and Jesus goes into his home, and he offers a blessing and heals Simon's mother-in-law. He knows him well enough to go to where he works and to interact with him at that time, and to even give him advice after they have been fishing throughout the night and caught nothing. And Jesus addresses the crowd. He said to Peter, "Why don't you take your boat out into deeper waters and put your nets down on the other side of the boat?" I've mentioned to you in the past that when it comes to receiving advice, I find that I can receive advice, even if it's hard, from somebody that I like and respect. It's much harder to receive that from someone I don't know very well and who may come across as being a bit arrogant. Peter has a very close and personal relationship with Jesus. We know that because of the history, and we know that because he addresses him as master. Still, I wonder if there wasn't some part in the back of Peter's mind who thought to himself, "I make my living fishing, and this carpenter is going to tell me how to catch fish after I've not been successful all night." But he remembered what Jesus did. He remembered his miraculous abilities. And I imagine, sort of with a heavy sigh in his voice, he says, "Yes, Master, if that's what you want, I will." And we're told that miraculously the nets were filled up with fish. And there were so many that one boat could not handle them all. So other boats are brought in. And with this second introduction to Jesus' miraculous abilities, it brings about a spirit of confession within Peter, who says to Jesus, "Stay away from me, because I am a very sinful man." We don't know the full extent of what he's referring to there, but he's humbled in the presence of Jesus' righteousness. And Jesus then says to him, "Don't worry, because from now on, you're still going to be doing something like this, but you're going to be catching people." The image is that of a net that is cast in which fish are catched up, or people come in and are brought to them. Peter is somebody that Jesus is saying to, "You will bring people into your life the way I have brought you into mine." I imagine Peter and Jesus being the kind of people who have a certain charisma, not the darker charisma that can be overbearing and manipulative, but the kind of person that when he enters the room, everybody brightens up and suddenly feels better about themselves and the occasion. The kind of person that inspires you and makes you feel good about yourself. The kind of person who makes you want to be the very best person you can be. If you are fortunate, you've had that kind of relationship with someone else, maybe in your family or outside of your family, like some of the scouts and the scoutmasters and the volunteers that have worked with you. Some of you may be fortunate to have married or formed long-time relationships with that kind of person, and you'll celebrate those on Thursday. And hopefully at some point in your life, you'll have the opportunity to be that kind of person for someone else. Peter is called to be a disciple, to follow after Jesus, and to be someone who will draw in and attract people to himself, and by that draw them in and attract them to a relationship with God, is built out of this very close relationship that Jesus had with Peter, being in his home, possibly sitting down at his table for a meal, healing his mother-in-law, coming to his place of work. That's the nature of the relationship that Jesus had with Peter. And discipleship comes out of that relationship. Elaine Heath is the dean of Duke Divinity School, and before that she taught evangelism at Perkins School of Theology in Texas. And she teaches in her work about how the early monastics used to spread the gospel, not by evangelism the way many of us think about going into a situation cold and meeting an individual or a group of people and immediately laying out the Christian message for them, and then asking them whether or not they want to accept that message. But instead, she talked about monastic communities, predominantly in Ireland, that were known for going into a community and setting up a little village, setting up some huts and some houses, and living in a commune type situation, and practicing various trades, offering their skills and their labor for people in the area, making things, gardening, buying and selling things. People first knew these monastics as members of the community. That person that fixed my wagon, the individual that I brought those turnips from, this person that I see. And after they knew them as members of the community, they began to notice that at specific times of day, they all went into their huts, or they went out into the open field, and they gathered for some sort of a religious ritual, the people who were native to that area being pagan. And they began to ask these people who were well-liked and trusted neighbors, what is this that you're doing when you go off into these gatherings? And that's when they shared the Christian faith with them. Elaine Heath shares some amazingly personal stories from her own life about people who formed those kind of relationships with her. She grew up in a family with an alcoholic parent that was harsh and abusive. It wasn't the nature and also the laws of that time would prevent people who were neighbors from being able to report the family. But people in the neighborhood began to certainly realize this is what's going on in that household. And one particular set of neighbors was a very kind, retired couple who lived close to her. And Elaine said that she and her brother used to like to go down and play in their backyard. And this older couple raised bees. And she said we were fascinated with that. And the man of the house would show, this is the protective gear that I put on whenever I harvest the honey. And he gave them the gift of a little honeycomb of wax with a honey on it. And she just thought it was the most amazing and divine gift she could ever receive. And she said she knew that they were probably aware of the situation at home, and they were limited of what they could do. But what they were able to offer her was a safe space where she was cared for and loved. She also talked about one of her elementary school teachers. She said she was the first teacher I remember who was a young woman. Many of her other teachers before then were older women who were close to retirement. And she said she was a public school teacher, so she probably didn't wear a great deal of money. But I remember what attention she used to pay to her appearance, how she wore makeup and she wore decorative jewelry and she would fix her hair a certain way. And she said as a young girl, she would look up at her teacher and think she was just the most beautiful and elegant woman in the world. And one day when the other students were dismissed for recess, Elaine said she was called over by her teacher to talk to her. And she was worried because she was afraid that she'd done something wrong and she was going to be reprimanded. But instead, her teacher said to her, I noticed that you have very dry skin. And she took a tube of Avon hand cream out of her desk and put some on her forearm. And she said, there, if you use this, it will help smoothen out and soften your skin. And it's got a nice fragrance, too. Here, you can keep this, too. And then she sent her out to recess. And Elaine said during recess that day, she kept sticking her arm up to her nose and smelling it, and just feeling how wonderful that is. Later in life, Elaine said that she had a mentor share with her very valuable advice. To say that when someone is brand new to the Christian faith, don't start out by teaching them doctrine. If you immediately start out by teaching them doctrine, they become legalistic. They think that Christianity is all about having memorized, prepared answers to questions you might be asked. Start by forming a relationship, like the relationship she had with her teacher and those kind older neighbors. A relationship based on trust and respect. A relationship that is safe and friendly. A relationship that shares with them the love of God. First, she said, invite people to be your friends as the ancient monastics did. And then, after forming that relationship, teach them about God. And then they can enjoy the intellectual pursuits of theological discourse and growing and developing their beliefs. But it begins with a relationship. Doctrine certainly has its place, but fundamentally, being Christian is about having a relationship with God. A relationship that comes through Jesus Christ. That's the nature of what it means to be Christian. And to be evangelist means that we are being a neighbor, that we are welcoming people into our fellowship with open arms and an open mind. We are providing a safe space where all can gather and learn together and learn from each other. People experience the gospel through us in the friendships that we form with them. And then with those who have been practicing the faith for many years and those who are brand new, we all deepen our relationship with Jesus Christ as disciples. Amen.